Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Asra Nomani. Asra is a journalist and an author, and she's a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Network. And she's got a new book out called Woke Army, the Red Green Alliance that is destroying America's freedom. Hi, Asra. Thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, Obaid. The jackhammer begins, which is a good metaphor, actually, um, because there is this concept of some of us as jackhammer parents, jackhammer activists, just out there being disruptors. So it's a perfect segue to our conversation. Um, I am so happy to talk to you because you've been in this fight with us since the beginning, and I'm just so happy to report back to you and all your listeners on the progress that we've made.
Yeah. So I mentioned your book, and I wanted to talk about that because that's the whole reason. I mean, I hadn't heard of critical race theory or anything like that. I got out of school in the early 90s. I'd heard a bit about post-colonialism and postmodernism and stuff like that, but the rest of it I didn't know anything about. And I got back from working in Afghanistan in 2014, and I started getting called a white supremacist for criticizing Islam.
Oh my
I'm like, A, I'm brown, and B, like, where's that coming from? So that's how I started looking into this and reading your book. It ties up a lot of the stuff of, like I'd spoken out about care, and in Canada, it's more things like ISNA than it is care. We
Yeah,
don't have them up here.
yeah,
And, the discussion, like how rotten the discussion around Islam was. And then, now with all this woke progressive stuff, whatever you want to call it, you see a lot of the parallels. So if you wouldn't mind getting into your book a little bit and like,
oh yeah.
what prompted you to do it, then, what you started finding.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I know a lot of your listeners are going to know who I am, but just to give them context. I was born in India, 1965, and I was born, first generation post-colonialism. So you use that important word. And I was literally post-colonialist. And my father and mother were born in British Raj, India. They were born in the era where the color of their skin, their birthplace, made them second, third, fourth class citizens, right? Under that colonial rule. Well, my parents, they got married, they had me and my brother. And where did they choose to arrive for their new life? At the United States of America. And now, fast forward some 5 decades, and exactly like you say, this nation is facing its own character assassination campaign as a white supremacist nation. So, why would my parents have arrived here? They arrived here because my dad fell in love with this country as a young student. He arrived here, and I'll never forget. He tells me the story. He arrived in Manhattan, Kansas, and yeah, he was a you know uh, one of many international students going to land grant universities in the United States. He met Miss Dairy Queen, 1962, and he went driving one day with his friends, other international students, and there they saw a car wash. And at the church car wash, they saw a professor, one of their professors, washing cars right next to a student. And my dad was so impressed by that notion of equality of labor, the dignity of labor. And he really, really loved that spirit in America that we have all believed in so deeply of meritocracy. So that's what brought him to this nation. And that's what helped me as a young girl go from, I didn't know a word of English obeyed when I came to the United States. And then by the age of 23, through America's public school system in West Virginia, growing up in West Virginia, I became a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. So, you know, then just like you say, just like you experienced, here I am, a Muslim minority, a woman of color, as they call us. And like you, when I started speaking out after 9/11 about the scourge of extremism within my faith, I ended up with these smears like you've received, being called an Islamophobe, a racist. And the book, Woke Army, is a love letter to my enemies. I released it on February 14th. And Obaid, when you read it, you can see that I name names in this campaign that our opposition waged against us, most of the time through masked identities, anonymous names, and subterfuge. They, for the last 20 years, the Islamists have now aligned with the leftists in the United States to disparage Muslim reformers, ex-Muslims, and anyone who dares to challenge their worldview. And just like you said, they have used critical race theory and this ideology of looking at everything through the lens of race as a shield. And that is how they have racialized Muslims and made it racist to talk about the headscarf or blasphemy laws or atheism, punishment for being an atheist. And I really wrote this book so that people can go deep into the weeds with me, really, on their tactics, so that they can really be free of their insidious strategy to hijack our minds. And the one concept that I really love, Obaid, that I learned from my friend Orly Petter, a psychologist specializing in trauma, is this idea that they hijack our empathy. And she coins it suicidal empathy, where the far left and the so-called progressives compromise their own values for equality and justice in order to get in bed with the Islamists. And that's my intention, is pierce their strategy so that you're not hijacked by it and you can stand up strong to it, just like you do.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, your book goes into a lot of detail about this, but there's a few things, and this comes more from the left in the West than it did from, fundamental Islam or, organizations like CARE. I don't know if you've read Nick Cohen's book, What's Left? And he talks about the disillusionment of the left after the fall of communism and how that switched from support of communism to being anti-imperialist. And so there was a lot of support for Saddam in the first Gulf War, even at the tail end of the Iran-Iraq conflict. And so because the left got disillusioned and they moved to this anti-imperialist thing, they, America's an imperialist power. They're, recolonizing the world, blah, 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 all that going on. And so that came in on it. And then again, The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright. I don't know if you've read that, but it chronicles how Al-Qaeda was formed, but it goes back and it talks about, in your book, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood, you talked about Hassan al-Banna, but in this one, in The Looming Tower, he talks about Syed Qutb and how he came to the States, got some of the Marxist training, got some of that, and then went back. And then, you have the whole, the Muslim Brotherhood in North Africa and the Middle East, that was an identitarian movement. It was, pan-Arabism, right? So these things have fed off each other for decades.
Yes.
And it's now, when all the intersectionality and everything, like you talk about the conference that Kimberly Crenshaw had in, was it 89, where they coined critical race theory and then all that stuff. It came into school. So you had these people going to schools, picking this stuff up, and it's just building off that grievance.
Yes. Yeah. And, I just, I did read Looming Tower and, really appreciated that at that time, Lawrence Wright was able to dissect, this ideology that brought us to this awful place of 9/11. And that was such an important analysis that unfortunately, even journalists are refusing to do now, because this campaign to silence any serious conversation about Islamic extremism has been so effectively silenced, out of fear of being called a racist and Islamophobe, being put on this anti-Muslim extremist list by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I just really think, as you're remembering that history, just think about like how deeply embedded, this movement is that I chronicle in the book, and yet how ineffective our strategy has been in defeating them. I just ordered What's Left, and I just really agree with you about the long war that the Islamists that believe in political Islam have been waging, marrying themselves with the Marxists and socialists. And so, this isn't a video interview, but when people see the book, which you can get at Amazon, you'll see the dramatic cover, hammer and sickle at the top left corner, and then the crescent moon and star of Islam in the bottom right corner. It was shocking to me, Obeida, even when I saw it. Like, man, I got to tell you, what happened is in the summer of 2020, when I ended up in the front lines of the battle over our children's education in the United States of America, I started seeing the players from the Council on American Islamic Relations emerging in that battle with activists from the far left who had very different social values, right?
Yeah.
But I then rewrote the whole book, Obey. I rewrote it. And you are the beneficiary of an education that I got that summer from folks like a fellow dad here in Fairfax County, Virginia, Glenn Miller, who literally studied under Derek Bell, the godfather of critical race theory at Harvard Law School. He studied alongside Kimberly Crenshaw. I learned from James Lindsay, who has been, a real translator for people of these big texts from history that have led us to critical race theory in the modern day. And I went back and obeyed. You know what I did? I literally went back and simply added that extra layer, like creating a map, on Google Maps, another layer of every Muslim activist that I explored and their, quote, intersectionality with critical race theory. And that's how I discovered Kimberly Crenshaw working beside Muslim ideologues at UCLA, engaging with Linda Sarsour in the Women's March. And that is how we now have this battle cry, in Ferguson, Missouri, from Ferguson to Gaza, as part of this activist community. And to this day, we have that marriage happening.
Yeah. And I mean, the far left thing too, like that's one thing, again, I was never anyone who was vocal or anything like that. It was only after I came back from overseas that I was like, something went really wrong and what's going on. But if you look at it, okay, the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 79, that would not have happened if it wasn't for communist students. And then if you look at places like South Yemen was a communist country, like there has been that affiliation between far left and Islam over and over again throughout the years. And it's just, I can see why they would, go to this grievance ideology, because it's so easy to gain, like the whole idea of harm, and words can harm you. So if I say something that criticizes Islam, you already have that with the fundamentalists, where if I criticize Islam, I'm criticizing them personally because they are Islam, apparently. So I mean, you have that. It's just so easy for them to get gamed, and it didn't work out too well for the communists in Iran. Let's just put it that way.
Right. They ended up dead, and that is deal with the devil that they made in trusting Ayatollah Khomeini. And my second book was about, my first book is the hot one, man, Obeid, that you need to get me back to talk about. I explored Tantra and Tantra tantric sex and meditation. So I ended up going on a completely different direction because of, just the tragedies that happened after 9/11 and with 9/11. But man, I was on a completely different journey, a spiritual journey. And that was my first book. My second book was about being a Muslim woman trying to challenge Islamic extremism. And I just couldn't believe that there was that, contradiction between the progressives in the United States and Europe and Canada, who just didn't understand what we were talking about, trying to push and promote Islamic feminism. And then I went back and I saw Ali Shariati's work in Iran, leading to the marriage with the Ayatollah, and his murder, really, right? His execution as an intellectual after the Islamists actually took power in 79. I would love, because I bet there's going to be a lot of listeners from my side who don't know you personally. Do you mind if you just tell you what you're comfortable telling about your own story and what brought you to this place? So, Babe, I know I don't want to turn the microphone around, but I'd like you to introduce yourself.
I started doubting Islam when I was young. 11.
Where were you?
Okay. So I was very similar to you. My family moved to Canada.
Where were you born?
I was born in India. I was born in Hyderabad. I was born in 69. My family moved here in 75 when I was 6.
I moved where?
And Montreal.
Great.
And, grew up here. My family was so in India back in that time as well. Like Islam in India was very, very moderate.
Yeah.
It was, and then, so, my parents weren't quite strict, or, they were pious. My mom prayed. My dad, gave the zakat to the mosque, and they were pious and all that. But they weren't very strict. And I started questioning it just because of Carl Sagan and Cosmos.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was 16, I just couldn't. I was like, no, this doesn't fit for me. I can't find the proof for it. Whereas if I follow science or whatever, they give me the proof. Like there's too many contradictions. And I was just very much living my life. And in 2002, I went overseas and started contracting with the military. And then, I worked in Bosnia and Kosovo and Sudan and Haiti, and Afghanistan. And I came back from Afghanistan in the end of 2000. Well, no, I came back to Canada. I left Afghanistan in December of 2013. I came back to Canada in March of 2014. And that's when all this stuff started happening.
Yeah.
And I had friends who would say, "Oh, I'm glad you're saying some sort of stuff about Islam because I can't speak up about it because I'm not brown." I was like, "What the hell does that have to do with anything?" And when I left Canada, it was, I may disagree with you, but I'll defend your right to say it. When I came back, was I disagree with you, and you should never be allowed to speak again.
Right.
And so, and I just wanted to know where that came from. So
Yeah.
I went down a few wrong turns and going to some weird rabbit holes, and I started hearing critical race theory and intersectionality and stuff. Like I said, I did a poli-sci degree, so I got out of university in 95. So like I said, I'd come across postmodernism and some post-colonialism, none of the CRT stuff, or intersectionality really, and so I just started reading it. And then that's when I could see why I was called a white supremacist for attacking Islam. It's not so much that I'm white, it's that I've taken on the ideas of white supremacy. And it's just a weird concept. It's like Nicole Hannah-Jones in the last election, when she said, there's a difference between racially black and politically black, right? So that
Right.
like that kind of idea started coming up, and I just started seeing it. And then, the first thing I noticed was, okay, this is a very religious movement. They have their own blasphemy laws. They have their own, heresy laws. They have their own punishments for apostasy. Conservative black people, the way I saw them being talked about was the same way I saw ex-Muslims and reform Muslims being talked about. Like, you weren't, you're not really black. You don't, you're a race traitor. You're a coconut or bounty bar, or, house Muslim, all this kind of stuff. And it just, for me, it was just trying to figure out what was going on and why, like, how the hell did we get here? And now I look at, that was, like I said, that was 2014. So 9 years later, I look at my country
Yeah.
Um, our immigration department has a definition of white privilege of it doesn't matter your race or your skin color. If you hold ideas, if you have ideas that uphold white supremacy culture, you have white privilege. And how they define white supremacy culture is that the graphic from the Smithsonian, their professionalism, love of the written word, sense of urgency, um, punctuality, like all these things, they define that as white supremacy, and they're teaching that to our diplomats. So
Right.
it's and I see the real world effects, and I also see the real world effects of what this ideology is doing to where we export it. I mean, take Africa for instance. China owns ports up and down that continent. We're sending intersectionality and critical race theory, and in South Africa they were having conferences starting in 2016 about how science must fall, and in 2020 or 2021 they introduced black physics. So like I came up from it from that angle. Like I'm like, you're hurting ourselves, but you're also the people you purport to help. You're giving them something so awful that they're not going to be able to, get their own liberation. Like in India, there's a woman, I forget her name, Vishavi, something or other. She's got a couple of documentaries out about the gender stuff, and she's talking about how women are losing their rights in India before they can even get them
Hmm.
because of the gender ideology. So sorry, rambled there a bit.
No, no, I'm so glad for that context for myself also, and then everybody who's listening, because, I think it's just so important to understand that all of us come to it from a very thoughtful place. The far left wants to talk about lived experience, but wow, listen to yours. You have lived the experience. You have been in the trenches, literally, with Muslims trying to bring equal rights, civil society, and rule of law to societies like Afghanistan. It's noble work, and it should transcend religion. Exactly, like you don't come into it as a Muslim, now you're an ex-Muslim, but values are values, and you have been fighting it. I have to tell you that I bet you were there till about 75, and I we would have crossed paths because I left India, Hyderabad, actually, in 1969 when you were born. Not that I got the memo that you were around. And I was like, I must have gotten the memo and be like, okay, Obaid's got this. Like, he's got it. So I can move to to America. But I went back right about 75. So I bet somewhere in the bazaar,
Yeah,
it's so
but
funny.
the thing you mentioned about the English, that it kind of made me laugh because I got here, I was 6 years old, went to
Yeah.
kindergarten, was staying with my aunt and uncle, and my aunt's preparing lunches for us for when we go to school. And she said, "Oh, you're gonna have a recess. Here's your little snack." And she gave me
Uh-huh.
cookies.
Uh-huh.
Now, I grew up in India. I learned the Queen's English, and the kindergarten teacher, when we had recess and she said, "Take out your snacks," and I was eating my cookies, she came up to me and said, "No, no, please tell your mom to give you healthy snacks. You shouldn't have cookies."
Oh
And
my
I looked at her like she was deranged. I'm like, "These aren't cookies. These are biscuits." I had no idea what
God,
a cookie was.
I love it. That's so great. That's so
Like
cool.
I had no clue what a cookie was. I just like,
Right. And I heard that biscuits have better nutritional value than cookies. That's
but
so
yeah,
great. I mean,
no,
there's,
but that's one thing. Like I don't know. I'll ask you this. This is my personal take on some of this stuff, and I'm not saying okay, yes, I experienced some racism, but what I'm saying here, I'm not calling it racism or any kind of thing like that. But I came to Canada and I was told about Enlightenment values and openness and true diversity, not what they're pawning off these days. And my parents took courses on Canadian values and laws and just like you can practice your religion but you can't force it on other people, like that kind of stuff. um but at the same point too, there was like I go over to a friend's house for dinner and their mom's like, "Oh, they're curious and they're asking questions now, what would be called microaggressions, right?" So
right.
for a little while there was it wasn't like I didn't belong or I didn't have friends, but there was also a sense of me being an outsider, but these are the values that are given, and these are the ones I choose more than just because I was born here or anything like that.
Yeah.
I've seen the other side of it. I choose these values over what I saw in India, and so I kind of held to those more than I think someone who was born here and just kind of took it for granted, who'd never seen
Mhm.
anything else. But
Yeah.
also at the same time, it's like, this is what you promised me as a country, so I'm going to hold you to it. So when I see someone like, and I can talk about Canadian politics. Wasn't just Trudeau, but what Trudeau's done since 2015 to this country, I'm like, I'm appalled. I'm disgusted because, again, I saw it from the outside, and I saw these, and it's a betrayal of everything that I was taught since I got here. Like, I don't know if that's
Mhm.
for
No.
you, if that's something similar
Oh,
or not.
yeah. No, very much. I'm so glad that you just went deep into your own story and like we can connect on that point because yes, in this new really bigotry, I think, of the critical race theory lens, they would present that beautiful cookie biscuit moment as white supremacy, of your teacher over you as a student of color. uh but that she has to force you to her rule book, all of their little checklist of what is examples of white supremacy. But for you it was a precious little moment, and um of you're just asserting your own identity and your own words, your own language, and your mom's the value, the love of your mom's biscuit. But what happened for me too is what you're saying. I had that sense of being an outsider, and I didn't understand just basic rituals, just like your family probably didn't, of the Christmas gift exchange, which is now removed because it's um, Christian nationalist supremacy, right, in our schools, right? I saw you roll your eyes in case
Yeah.
anybody's missing that little microaggression he just threw out there against the woke culture. Um, but I ended up just like you, seeing the um, options out there in the world. I saw, because of your travels and my travels, we both grew up as Islamic extremism was also being exported, right, from Saudi Arabia to our communities in North America. And so I saw the possibilities of regression, and I saw family members go choose that path, and I knew that that wasn't my the value system. So I, just like you, I did choose values of what I called and considered in those days to be classic liberalism: individual rights, free speech, equality, irrespective of identity, non-sectarianism, right? And pure secular democracy. And then, just like you, I think I saw that clash both within our Muslim community, right? And then now with this new emerging left ideology that is actually very racist, very bigoted, very unequal. Like, equity does not mean equality anymore. And it has been very, very disappointing to me, especially because I have seen it. I've seen the far left, folks from Justin Trudeau to Joe Biden, the Democratic Party in the United States, compromise these essential values that you and I had chosen, as new citizens to North America. And I think that's why, like, our struggle is so necessary and so valiant. Like, we made different choices related to Islam. Like, you left Islam, I stayed within Islam to try to reform from within. But to me, the fight that we're both doing is for those values that we chose as new immigrants to this continent.
Okay, just kind of sticking with this, because there's yourself, there's, then if you look at immigrants from China and Hong Kong, and you take a look at I'm forgetting her name, from North Korea. She just got a new
Yes,
book out.
yeah,
Yami Park.
yes.
You know, and these people who say, okay, well, we listen to immigrants, listen to people of color, whatever. when we're saying like you're bringing in something that's very authoritarian, it like you can compare it to Islam, you can compare it to Christianity, you can compare it to Maoism. They're all totalitarian ideologies. They all have the same, MO,
Right.
but what they hate is different. Their focus is different, but they use the same tactics. And you can point this out, but then we get ridiculed, like I said, house Muslim or whatever, or Uncle Tom, or this and that, or you didn't really experience socialism in Venezuela, or like, it's
Yes.
ridiculous. Like the
What I do know is that what I have come to understand, I studied propaganda as a graduate student and, and became a journalist. So you could argue I learned the craft very well. Um, but of course, my moral compass is truth, and the tactics that they have used is falsehood, defamation, and character assassination. And I have worked alongside some actual experts in character assassination, academics, and have really learned from them about how that is a tactic of warfare. Since really, if you think about it, the story of Adam and Eve was this character assassination by the snake
yeah,
against Eve, right?
yep,
It's, it's mythology. Hey, if you believe it literally, it's still character assassination. Joan of Arc, Cleopatra. I'm talking about women targets here, but of course, this has been the story of defamation to build power. And so I know that a lot of times I want to also tell people who are listening, it feels very personal. It has felt very personal to me when I've come under attack also, but know that it's part of their power and control tactics, to try to shame you. And shame is such a great lever for silencing people. But exactly like you said, Obaid, when I ended up finding myself in the summer of 2020, learning about the deep ideological intersection between the leftists and the Islamists, I ended up aligned and in the trenches with this amazing mother, Yu Yan Zhou, who was a mom at my son's high school in Northern Virginia. The school had come under attack for its merit-based admissions to the school. And this was a value that the Islamists and the wokeists wanted to dismantle because they want to dumb down our kids in order to be able to indoctrinate. And Yu Yan, she had stood in 1989 at Tiananmen Square, for freedom and liberty. And now here she was standing in the United States of America for the same principles that brought my father to this country. And I just want to tell you something, that at the beginning of this journey, 20 years ago, when I first walked in through the front door of my mosque, I had my mom beside me and my dad, because they just gave me the greatest gift of unconditional love. My mom obeyed, she would wear a, a hoodie with Brooklyn across the front. Yeah, as her hijab. And look at us now. Look at the women of Iran. Look at them. They have defied the Islamist leftist nexus in order for Masih al-Najad to now be a Time woman hero. They have forced the left to abandon, on some level, they're still in bed with the Islamists, of course, but they have forced them to really uh, like abandon this failed alliance with the Islamists. Not completely, we know this, and there's
yeah,
still so much to be done. But I'll tell you, you're absolutely right that you and we are up against this machine, and I expose them. I name names in the book, and I'm so proud to have survived them, and the point that we're talking today. because that's what it's going to take for all of us to just, continue to have that perseverance, that resilience.
On this point, because you mentioned, your son's school and stuff, and like I started looking into the education, like how this was coming into schools. And like at this point, I get really, really angry. Okay, like yes, there's what's going on in the schools, which is awful, but it's, you know, like you have a little bit of notoriety. Like you said, you mentioned you work for the, you wrote for the Wall Street Journal. You've got a little bit of fame and stuff, but the average everyday parents, but I mean, that still gives you a lot to lose as well, but cancel culture and all that. But the average everyday parent is now fighting against this stuff. And you have academics who've seen this rise up and they're still quiet. And I mean, obviously not all or whatever, but it's like that gets me like they're leaving it to you to fight.
Yes.
And it's also going to, I mean, at the end, it's going to help them as well because there are some academics now who are pushing back on all this DEI stuff and things like that. But it's like, where were you? You saw it happening in your institutions. You saw it, your institutions getting taken over, and you left it to parents. And now, when parents are fighting back, you're saying, "Oh, well, that law's not right, and that's not right." It's like, well, where were you for 20 years?
Yeah. I'll tell you the story that just happened days before the book was about to come out. And it was almost like serendipity because I needed that extra confidence as I went out into the world with this message about the woke army. One of those moms is this mom, Suparna Datta. She was a child like us, born post-colonialism in India. Her father had walked across the border from what became East Pakistan in 1947 to India side. He grew up in poverty. He ended up in the military in India. And she arrived in the United States like my father, with just dollars in her pocket, And Suparna was a mom in technology, and her son was going to my son's high school. This high school is called Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. And so when I met Yu Yan, this mom, amazing mother from China, I met Suparna in that summer of 2020 and obeyed. That was the moment. Literally, Suparna and I spoke at this first school board meeting together. It was a virtual meeting. She is, this great technology whiz, but you know how it is when it comes to the simple technology. She couldn't figure out how to get the video going. So you can hear her voice, just so strong. And it was her first public speech. She was a mother, just an ordinary mother. But she knew that socialism, this march to extremism in our schools, was going to sabotage everything, every value that she embraced about this country. So she stood up, Yu Yan stood up, I stood up, and 2.5 years later, Obaid, she just faced a nomination vote in the Virginia Senate. Because guess what? This mother became a political activist, and she helped elect Governor Glenn Youngkin to be Virginia's governor, defeating this Democrat nominee, Terry McAuliffe, who had said parents don't have a say in what their children are taught. It was just a terrible gaffe and reflected the belief system, unfortunately, of the far left. And so here we are at this amazing moment of empowerment, right, Obaid? Like we, the parents, have one of our own now nominated to the Virginia Board of Education. She's nominated to the Virginia Board of Education. But guess what? At a Board of Education meeting, she decides to go toe to toe with the wife of Senator Tim Kaine, who had been the vice presidential nominee with Hillary Clinton. Well, Ann Holton, the first lady, a former first lady of Virginia, when Tim Kaine was governor, says that actually the U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence are not, again, not remarkable documents for children to be learning from, and that socialism was compatible with democracy and should not be, Yes, I saw your eyebrows raised for those that are not being able to watch him. Yes. And guess what? Obeyed Suparna, this immigrant mom, stood up for the US Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the idea of a non-socialist nation. And 3 days later, a campaign began, a character assassination campaign. Sunday night, Red for Ed, Virginia. So they're not subtle about their goal. Red, as in socialism, for Ed, Virginia puts out a story. It's going to sound familiar to you, Obaid, that Suparna is a white supremacist. Yes, a Hindu woman of color. And guess what happens the next day? The word goes out among the Virginia activist community. They start going after Suparna. And I got this. I couldn't believe it. An elder from one of our mosques here and our Virginia Mosque Association, a man by the name of Rafi Ahmed, affiliated with the Council on American Islamic Relations, picks up the phone and calls one of the Democratic swing senators, a man by the name of Chap Peterson, and he says, don't vote for Suparna. She is an anti-Muslim Hindu extremist. That's the death knell, and she lost the nomination. And Obaid, guess what she did? She didn't go slink into the shadows. She spoke strong and courageously and continues to speak to this day and says that their shame of her is a badge of honor. And she is, to me, an American hero that has stood up to the woke army. I love her, and I hope everybody has her spirit in them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this kind of stuff too. That again, these are side effects of this stuff. So um there was a conference when COVID first happened. So July of 2020, there was an online conference that was put on in Toronto. I believe one of the organizers was one of the lead editors of the Toronto Star. Another one, he is now the head of one of the school boards in Ontario. But the whole it was, I believe it was two South Asians and one Middle Easterner. And it was brown complicity and white supremacy, how brown people help white supremacy get along. And then you have the anti-Semitism stuff. I mean, Canada hired a anti-racist coach for CBC, so our national public broadcaster. The guy was living in Lebanon. He'd been investigated by CSIS, which is Canadian RCMP, FBI, or Canadian FBI, CIA type of thing. And at one point, he wasn't allowed to come back into the country. He had put out tweets where he wanted, Zionists killed and Jews killed. And then his excuse was, I'm only talking about white supremacist Jews. So this whole thing of if you uphold white supremacy, professionalism, all that, like it's creeping in. And so also I think it was 2021 when there was attacks from Gaza had attacked Israel. Israel retaliated. Then Palestinian protesters or pro-Palestinian protesters started protesting in, United States, Canada, whatever. There were Jews being chased in the streets in Toronto and Montreal. And what does Trudeau say? His first thing out of his mouth, or I think it was first tweet, whatever about it, he says, please don't be Islamophobic. So right. Jews have now been granted whiteness or white adjacency, Asians, be it South or East, I've seen things like yellow privilege and, garbage like that. Like we're white adjacent. So we're okay to attack because we don't believe that ideology. We're apostates. Like I said, that then they blame it on, oh, look at the white supremacist attacks on Asians. It's like, okay, but there was a study that someone put out, I think it was Pew, but overall anti-Asian sentiment was higher among whites. And this is in the United States. I don't have it for Canada. But if you looked at violent attacks, that was majority perpetrated by Black people. But, they just give you the overall, which they're including things like racial slurs and whatever, right? I mean, racial slurs are bad, but I think it's a lot worse when they're, attacked and killed. I mean, that's just me though.
Yeah. Yeah. This is an effort to whitewash, woke wash any critics of their ideology. And I hope everybody can see, in the great examples that you've provided, the pattern. That's what we are. We have a duty to see the data points and come to logical conclusions about the strategy that is being implemented. I try to lay out as many examples as I possibly can in Woke Army. And even there, I crossed into 400 plus pages of page, and I wasn't done. So
No, no, there's so much.
yeah, I can't wait for the sequel. This is going to keep coming out because um, folks
Uh,
have to see that, every case that you documented is just tip of the iceberg. It's what we know, it's what we see, but we don't know their whisper campaigns, right? Their alienation of us in circles that we don't even know about. They're blacklisting us. And again, you have to remember, to me, it's so important I every day I have a daily meditation. Make sure that the work that I'm doing is consistent with the values, right? That I believe. And that's what you have to do every day to make sure that you stay clear inside of your heart so that when you face those efforts to discredit you, you're not shaken, because that's what we as parents have faced. That's what we as Muslims and ex-Muslims have faced again and again. But this is not about just us. It's about the tactics. These are the tactics of war.
yeah. Look, I don't want to keep you much longer, but just one last thing, and maybe it's a little bit of a downer, but I keep remembering back to this. Okay, so the movie Man for All Seasons, I remember watching it, and it was pretty cheesy, and Charlton Heston was over the top in it. But Hitchens kept talking about this one scene where the Crown prosecutor Roper is talking to Thomas More, and Thomas More says, "Well, you'd cut down all the laws in England to catch or you'd cut down, some of the laws in England to catch the devil." And then Roper turns around and said, "I'll cut down every single law in the land to catch the devil." And then Thomas More says, "Well, once all the laws are gone and the devil turns to face you, where are you going to hide?" And that, to me,
Mhm.
one of my biggest things was there's going to be a lot of overcorrections, and we're not going to be prepared for them. So what I see now is the institutions in the United States and Canada that protected us they themselves become, you know, radicalized,
Oh, yes.
and we have nothing left to protect us. So, I mean, when the vaccine first came out and the CDC had that opinion where they should give it by race, and then the next day they took it away because of the backlash. Everyone's like, "Oh, see, it's fine now." It's like, no, it's not. 2 years later, you've got medical schools making students take diversity oaths over the Hippocratic oath. Like,
Right.
you just, I mean, it's like you've let everything get overrun, and we don't have a proper defense. I'm very thankful for places like the Fire who are now going more general than just academic. But you know the ACLU is useless, the ADL is useless. Like, what do we have left to defend ourselves?
Well, I'll just be optimistic because I don't know how, and I don't know why, but I'm a perpetual optimist. Okay, that I never, ever, ever give up, ever. And that's because I always just look at the arc of history, and I do believe that it bends towards goodness. And I do believe that whatever the forces that are against us, whatever the institutions in the system, like we will prevail. And we have to think about it a bit. Like you and I both emerged out of a history in which our ancestors had the system against them. That reality of British colonial rule was an institution and a system that our ancestors overcame. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, my dada in Hyderabad. So I don't know where your family was. I was going to ask you where your family's neighborhood was. We were in right by the train station. I don't know if that was anywhere near your house.
Well, I mean, my grandfather's house was in the old city,
Oh, lovely.
and then before we left, my dad actually had moved right near the airport near
Okay.
Gundipate.
Okay, lovely. So we were living near the train station, and it was a central location, and my dada would he was a defense attorney, and he would have as his clients the freedom fighters who were being tried by the British for fighting for India's freedom, and he would most often lose. And they would be sent to the Guantanamo Bay of India down in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, right? The
Mhm.
Kala Pani, as they call it, to die. We won over that injustice. And I do believe that we will prevail. I know we will prevail in the United States of America. And I'll give you just one small example. I told you all about meeting Yu Yanzo and Suparna Dutta, two women moms, PTA moms, who emerged as, I would argue, civil rights activists for today's 21st century. Because the new war on merit at my son's school was a targeted hit on Asian students. Because just like the narrative that you were talking about, Asian students had become the new white adjacent, and the failure of the public school system to bring Black and Hispanic students up to a level where they could gain merit-based admissions to the school was something the school board didn't want to deal with. So they got rid of the merit-based admissions. There was a drop in students enrolled in the school in new class from about 70% to about 50 some percent of the next class with the new racist admissions process that they brought in place. So we got this outfit that is called Pacific Legal Foundation, a nonprofit, and they represented us. They are civil rights lawyers who take the mantle where the ACLU fails us today. And guess what? We won in federal court. Yeah, we won. The judge in Alexandria ruled that the new admissions process is racist, discriminatory, and unconstitutional. Just like in Brown versus Board of Education, our Fairfax County School Board, which I nicknamed Unfairfax County School Board, yes, they insist on holding strong to their unconstitutional admissions process. So remember in the 1950s, the school board fought it's called Brown versus Board of
Board of
Education. Yeah. The Board of Education was the institution of racism, and it is today. And guess what? You will not believe this. The same law firm in Virginia that fought Brown versus Board of Education is fighting our parents, Yuyan, Suparna, me, and other amazing parents. But we're going to lose in the appeals court as they go through that process because we can tell already that the judges are stacked against us. But that's okay. We're going to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And mark my word, we will win. And our case, which is called Coalition for TJ versus Fairfax County School Board, will be the Brown versus Board of Education case for the 21st century. And this will be a huge defeat to the woke army because it was, again, not just the leftist activists that were pushing this anti-merit push, but it was their marriage with the Islamists in Virginia who did this to dumb down our kids and make America less competitive on the global stage. And so, Beth, I want to leave you with that little victory, not a little victory, it's a huge victory. And we will keep winning like that. We will find court cases and we will use every lever of justice that we can. And we must do that. Raise our voices, have lawyers fight for civil rights. We are now the civil rights warriors of the 21st century.
Well, I mean, that's really good to hear. I remember you tweeted about it and I read the articles when you'd won that first case. So I mean, I'm definitely going to keep watching this because unfortunately what happens in the States rolls over into Canada. And, you know, if we can get more and more pushback to some of this stuff, other places, maybe more Canadians will start waking up. Um, Anyway, it was really
Yeah.
great talking to you, Asra. It's been awesome. You're amazing. If you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you, I'll put that in the description. Also put the links to where they can buy your book as well.
Thank you. Yes, please. I have an open DM on Twitter, so people can reach out to me directly at Asra Nomani, ASRANOMANI. You can email me at my email address is asra at asranomani.com. And I'm going to take a page from the Woke Army. And I'm going to ask you all, as you're listening, if you know of a place where you would like to have bulk orders of Woke Army distributed and sent, contact me. Let's try to find folks who will donate to buy those books, get them in the hands of politicians, policymakers, um, and educate people, inoculate them. So please contact me. And if I can come to your community and speak in person or online, I want to do it because I want this book and its message in everybody's minds and in their hearts so that they can stand strong against the woke army so that we can all move on to other things like gardening, right? Obeying,
Exactly. Well,
painting,
yeah.
and
No, and again, yeah, I mean, definitely go out and get Woke Army. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. And yeah, please contact Asra, and more we can get this word out, the better it is. Once again, thank you, Asra. It was great, and thanks everyone for listening.
I want to just say thank you, Obaid, because it's people like you who have emerged to create now a cacophony of protest and resistance, as they like to say, to the woke army's incursions in our society. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate it. And you're going to make a difference in the course of history.
Thanks a lot, and thanks again, everyone.